What is going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Clap Your Hands podcast brought to you by Odyssey Sports. Make sure you are downloading that Odyssey app. Make sure you're leaving those 5-star reviews. Been a little light on them recently. Come on, guys. Let's get those 5-star reviews going. Brought to you by
Some
Sports.
people are on summer vacation, Elliot.
It's true.
They're taking
It's
a
true.
break from the 5-star reviews.
Yes, but maybe get back to it. Brought to you by Sports Radio 94 WIP, of course. Today's pod brought to you by one guy who's excited to see Oppenheimer, the other guy who's excited to see the Barbie movie. I'll let you guys decide which one is which. I'm sure it's a true mystery amongst the Clap Your Hands listeners.
Well, one of us already has tickets to see one of those movies, so I'm already ahead of you on that front. We'll see.
So you were saying this before we started, that you were unable to get tickets until July 31st, I think you said, or something, like far out.
So let's qualify. It's good tickets. So the
Okay.
70 millimeter IMAX, which is like Christopher Nolan's, like, you got to see this movie in this format or whatever.
All right.
They're very limited screenings for that. It's like 4 a day, and they're all in King of Prussia. And you couldn't sit anywhere but the front row until like the end of the month, essentially. So
How do you feel
I clearly didn't plan ahead that much.
How do you feel about buying seats to a movie theater? Like, I feel like this has to be within the last, maybe 5-6 years, maybe a little longer than that, actually. But I don't know. I feel like I'd like to use to have to just go wait in line and get your seat. Like, are you a fan of the buying in the specific seat for the theater?
For something like this, yes, because it allows me to just kind of plan ahead a little bit rather than you show up and you kind of cross your fingers that there's going to be a good seat there. Now, my family, because of my father, has always been insane about being early to stuff. So
I can appreciate that.
If this did not exist, I would probably just be there like unnecessarily early and sitting there watching all the stupid commercials they show during the movies now. Like, to give you an idea, my dad was like, we're going to leave for the airport 3 hours before the flight.
Man, big airport got him. He doesn't know you can just get there an hour early now and be fine.
Well, especially because I have global entry and TSA pre-check. So
look at you.
So
last thing on the movie really quick. I was looking into seeing it on the IMAX. Did you know that the Franklin Institute IMAX is like not a thing anymore? Do you remember that?
I actually did learn that recently, but yes, that's
because I went to go
I found out.
I went to go see The Dark Knight there when it first came out. And like, I will say, a movie on that screen, and for those that haven't been, and I hope it's none of you, it's like a completely circular screen, basically. It's not like an IMAX is kind of just a big movie screen, if we're being honest. There's not really a huge difference between just a regular
sound. Like, it's really the sound is what I think is the big difference.
But apparently it's shut down during COVID and it's not coming back. I feel like how is this not a bigger deal? I used to love going to the IMAX growing up. It's awesome to see movies on. It's just devastating news to hear. It would be awesome to see Barbie on it, I guess, is where I'm going with this.
It is a bummer. And while I'm on the subject of my father, one of his stories he loves to tell. So you know how that's the Tuttleman Omniverse Theater is like the name of that theater. So it's like a friend of a friend of a friend is David Tuttleman, someone my dad knows.
Wow.
And he went to a birthday party of his in like probably like the 80s or something.
What a flex.
And he shows up to this like obviously like ultra rich guy's birthday party. And like Casey and the Sunshine Band is just like playing at his house. It's just like the most random.
So me and Kristen are watching this show. I'll say loosely, but it's a reality show where like it's a bunch of people in a house and you have to figure out who is related to a celebrity. So like I think Tom Hanks's niece is in the house and there's clues to like figure out who it is. This would have been a good one for your dad. The Tuttleman guy, like I feel like that qualifies. Yes, it looks like William Guest. Elliot's the Barbie guy and Kyle is the
I'm not. So I will say I'm not anti Barbie as a general concept. I'm not like hating on anybody who's going to see Barbie, and I might end up seeing it myself. But yes, the tickets that I booked are for Oppenheimer.
The marketing for it has been ridiculous. But anyway, speaking of uncomfortable in terms of Kyle waiting to get comfortable seats for Oppenheimer, not sitting in the front row.
What a segue.
You like that? I've had that in my head for about a minute. I figured I'll go with it. As always, it feels like the last 12 pods we've done, there is a slight James Harden update that is not really an update, but kind of is. I like to consider myself like a connoisseur, an expert. I'm not sure if I use that word right, but an expert of social media posts. This one has me floored. I do not know what he means by it. For those that don't know, if you've been living under a social media rock, James Harden posts on his Instagram something like it's like, I've been comfortable for too long. It's time to get uncomfortable. Puts it in his story, all black screen, white lettering, nothing else. Posts it yesterday. Kyle, I guess we'll try to solve this one together. We'll put our Sherlock Holmes like hats on and try to decipher it. I think it's pretty clear it's somewhat related to this trade request, right? Like this isn't a Tour de France Joel Embiid thing. I think this is clearly something about the Sixers.
So I'm less inclined to say yes, only because I think he wants it to come off that way.
Yes.
And it could be something else where he's just like, yeah, I'm okay just letting that simmer right now because I'm pissed at Daryl and I want to get traded. But if I was going to sit here and tell you, well, this is what it means, I'd be lying to your face. It's just another one of those stupid things about covering a sports team in 2023 that we have to figure out what this kind of stuff means, or you have to pay attention to. Oh my God, James Harden took the Sixers out of his bio
Oh yeah, there
on
was that too. I forgot
Instagram,
about that.
and doesn't say basketball player for the 76ers, and it's like, look, that stuff matters in the sense that you do have to kind of keep track of little things like that because these guys love to leave breadcrumbs and be passive aggressive and messy. But unlike you, I'm not going to sit here and say I have like a PhD in passive aggressive Instagram comments. It could be, maybe James just had a tough relationship end with somebody
Yes.
that isn't Daryl Morey. So
Doesn't strike me as a
I'm looking
relationship
forward
guy,
to see if there are more of these, I guess. But for now, it's just a big old mystery.
Well, PhD in social media posts and certainly emojis I would put under my qualifiers. My wife would probably tell you I can have a PhD in passive aggressive. Just realized the joke in there.
Ooh.
Not gonna go down that road. But here's what I do think it actually could mean. Like, been comfortable for so long, it's time to get uncomfortable. I think it's clearly a threat that he's going to cause some trouble if he comes in for the Sixers. If you think about his relationship with Daryl, it's been comfortable. We all know they've been on good terms. That's why he's in Philadelphia. That's why he forced his trade from Brooklyn to Philadelphia. Originally had interest in coming to Philly from Houston. I think he's saying, like, it's time to get uncomfortable. Like, he's going to do something. Now, you could argue for James, like, being in this spot of coming to a team, causing problems, or I shouldn't say causing problems, but making it so that the team wants to trade him. He should feel pretty comfortable doing that. Like, he's done it twice before. This isn't a new path he's going down. There's all those memes going around of him getting the fat suit out the closet and that stuff.
He's getting ready, man.
Yeah,
I said the other day, he's going to be getting Eddie Murphy's suit from the Nutty Professor out. That's what we're doing.
It must be fun to get ready to come into shape, to come into camp fat. Like, that's got to be a fun few months, being like, all right, I don't have to work out. I'm just going to eat and drink a bunch and put on a bunch of weight. Like, that seems pretty actually comfortable, I would say, for James, if that's where he's going. But no, I do think this is a threat to the Sixers. I mean, the question is, like, how seriously are the Sixers going to take it? Daryl, a very online person, I'm sure he has seen this post. Like, do you think the Sixers we talked about this a little bit on the last pod, but do you think the Sixers are worried about James actually causing trouble?
I'd say somewhat, yeah, but the message from the Sixers, whether it's Daryl Morey giving interviews in public or, what people are saying when the cameras are off or they're not speaking for public consumption, is that they're going to hang on to him unless they get a trade offer that meets their standard that they want to hit. So that means they're either getting a star back, they're accumulating a bunch of assets to move for a star, or they're going to say, James, you better suck it up and come back, because otherwise Now there's also out there this week, who was it? Zach Lowe, I think, beginning of this week, did a story about how Ben Simmons got a year of service time
Yeah.
for the year where he held out on Philadelphia, but that won't apply for James Harden or guys on the final year of their contract. So if he were to sit out for 30 days or more, I believe, that they could actually say you're not a free agent next
Mhm.
summer, can you imagine that if they don't make a trade and
He
Harden
sits
holds
all
out
year.
and they say, just to spite him, like, fuck you, you're not a free
Well,
agent.
that's the
I
thing.
don't
Like,
think they would do that.
I
I
think they
think
would
that's
just
just
renounce
like,
his rights. Like, they would just be like, all
I
right,
think
go
at
ahead.
that point they'd say we don't want to deal with it. But I would be. Who do you think is a franchise that would actually put their foot down and do something like that? If you had to pick from the 30 teams.
I mean, the sad thing is the Heat were the first one that came to mind, just in terms of like
I actually
a
really disagree because I think they're so tied to building their team in free agency that they would never take that risk. I think it'd
fair.
have to be like a small market. We don't get free agents anyway, so we're just going to say you're not going to do this to us.
Well, the tough thing is it would have to be a team that really wanted the guy back. And I feel like often if the guy is held out for an entire year at that point, like I just don't think the team would want him back. Like it's like Daryl, it's like the Ben thing. Daryl held on to Ben because he wanted to get a big trade return for him. He's going to do the same for Harden. Deep down, I don't think Daryl wanted Ben back. I think that he probably wants James back more than he wanted Ben for sure. But at the same time, and this has been something that's been going through my head too, like if Harden just didn't opt in, and I think that's proven to have been probably a mistake by him. But if Harden just didn't opt in, I don't know, is Daryl offering him anything? Like I just wonder if Daryl's perfectly okay having James as a trade asset as opposed to having James as a player on the team. I know he said this week that he wants James back and he hopes he changes his mind and everything, but ultimately he clearly doesn't have that much interest in him if he wasn't going to offer him any kind of long-term deal.
Also, while we're on the subject of the opt-in, I know we've probably discussed it a little bit. I'm like really tired of, and this is going to come off as anti-player, and it's not, but I'm really
Mhm.
tired of the like someone opts in or they sign a contract extension, and then it's like, yeah, I want to be elsewhere. It's like, dude, then don't
Yeah.
fucking sign the contract or don't opt in. The it's more egregious in the case of somebody like Dame Lillard, where signed a multi-year extension for like $60 million and he's
Mhm.
got several years left, and then it's like, nah, actually, get me out of here. And I understand all this stuff about, you know, wants to be a certain level of competitive, and the Blazers haven't been, and so on and so forth. But it's also like, you could simply sign 1 year deals for a ton of money and not do this and not be in
Yeah.
this position where you could just leave. Like, it's the thing that I respect about LeBron is that he puts pressure on his organization, no matter who he's playing for, to be good every single year, because he makes it very clear, if we are not good enough to compete, I'm out of here. And like, that's fair. If a guy says that to you and says, I will test the waters in free agency, that's great. All this, the way the league is going, where it's you constantly have to be worried about, all right, we signed somebody and now that guy might just request a trade with 3 years left on his deal. It's like, what are we doing here, man? Like, and I think that sucks for fans too, where it's
Mhm.
like, it used to be, oh, we got this guy to recommit on a max deal or whatever it is. Like, that's a big victory for whether you're a team in a place like Philly or a small market team. It's like, great, my favorite team got a star to come back and he's here for 5 years. It's like, he might be there for a year and a half or less, and then say, yeah, no, I just wanted my money and I want to get the hell out of here. Like, I think that sucks.
So I'm like a little on the in the middle of this. I definitely have come around more to your point of it. Like if you're a Sixers fan, and let's say you're, let's be honest, one of the few that really likes James Harden at this point, and like he opts in, you should then be like, all right, I'm excited to have him back on the team. Or if you're a Blazers fan and he signs that, and Dame signs that 5 year deal, you should be like, all right, I'm excited to have him. So like I do understand from a consumer standpoint why this is probably something the NBA is going to have to fix. I don't know what the fix would be. Maybe it's like if you sign an extension, you're unable to be traded for the first 2 years of the deal or like whatever percentage of the contract. Like maybe that is something where I think even if you did a year, it wouldn't really work. So I do understand the problem. Where I disagree with you a little bit, and I hesitate to make this like a workers' right thing. Because let's be honest, these guys are making millions and millions of dollars. This is not
Yeah.
about workers fighting for above minimum
Yeah, like
wage or
poor Dame Lillard making $60 million. That's the plan in
exactly right.
Portland.
So I think sometimes like these points can be diminished by people saying it's not about like workers' rights. My where I disagree is just I do think players over time like earn the right to control where they should be. So I understand the point of it sucks for fans and the league should probably do something about the fact that Dame is asking out. But Dame has also stayed with the Blazers way longer than most people would. Like
Sure.
Harden's a debatable one because right now he does not have the market that he would, but he's still a top 75, top 50 player of all time, whatever you want to say. So I do find myself saying it's okay for players to use the power they have earned in their career to try to get somewhere. But I think it's gotten a little out of control. And this is someone that loves rumors, loves trades. Like when I played NBA 2K growing up, I would literally just simulate most games and basically be a general manager. So I enjoy the content of it and the trading of it. But and I feel this way with Maxey too. Like if you're someone that says I don't want to trade Maxey because I enjoy watching him, okay. Okay, like I can't fight you on that. Part of being a sports fan is liking the players, enjoying following them. Iverson didn't win a lot of games growing up, if we're being honest. He had the one run. Outside of that, he was like a 5 seed, 6 seed most year. He's my favorite player of all time. And my favorite team of all time is one that didn't win a title because of him. So I think that there is certainly a part of this where it's like if you're a fan of a player, you deserve to like have that player stay and not be afraid. But then I also see in any profession, if you're really good at it for, 10 years or whatever, I don't know. I think you earn the right to play where you want to play.
Yeah, I just think it's so disingenuous to like sign an extension and then like I don't want to harp too much on Lillard, but like oh, Mr. Loyalty, this and that, and then when it's time that he wants out, it's like I will only play for this team. It's like come on,
Yeah, but he's
dude.
kind of
You
earned that
really
right.
he technically he does not because he's under
You're right.
contract.
Technically
Like
by the letter of the
yeah, he
contract.
has the right in the sense that this is how the league operates now. But I think there has to be a way that, and it could just be like, well, the new CBA is already in place.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing is going to change about this for the next 7-8 years or whatever it is. But it just really, I would be, if I was a fan, really frustrated by having to hear guys be like, yeah, trade me to only this place. It's like, bro, you could just be a free agent and you could make the decision that you're going to take less money in order to play somewhere. It's just a lot of like having your cake and eating it too. Like these guys want, and look, I get it. They don't, their careers, their shelf life is not as long as somebody who's just like a normal worker or someone who works at like
Yeah.
Apple or Google
Where
or
their career
Microsoft
is
or
not tied to
wherever.
their physical ability.
Yeah. So look, I understand you're trying to get max dollar value, but there also has to be a consideration for if somebody's
Mm-hmm.
going to pay you 60, 50, 40, 30 million dollars for the next
Well,
5 years or whatever, that you can't just like a year later, or even in like Harden's case, he opts in and it's an opt-in to immediately move and only to one place. It's like, come on, man.
Well, so I think an interesting part of this, Stephen A. Smith brought it up with the Blazers, but let's keep it with the Sixers and Harden. Like Stephen A. brought up that maybe when Dame signed that extension with Portland, they're like, look, sign the extension, but if you want to move, we'll work with you to get you maybe where you want to go. Like the Blazers, while Dame gets the money, the Blazers also really benefit from Dame signing that extension. Like they control and he can't walk in free agency. We have an interesting point in the comments. Miles Johnson says, if you remember, KD walked from Oklahoma to Golden State. If I remember correctly, they didn't get anything for that return.
Which is,
So,
and again, that's fine. Like it was annoying from the sense of the Warriors were just too good and it like made the NBA not fun for several years. But that and how LeBron handles it, like that puts pressure on the team. That's exactly what you want as a player. They believe that you credibly can leave. They try to make the team as good as possible while you're there. And if they lose you, then they have to deal with the consequences of trying to win now with you. Like that's, to
Well, but
me, that's
the
how it
flip
should
side of
work.
that though is like it's why teams want players to sign 2-year deals. It's so that you own their rights so that you can trade them for something. Like you're right. If Dame signed a 1-1 with a player option and just kept it so every year he essentially could become a free agent if he wanted, he accomplishes the same goal. He has job security to an extent, obviously like probably 90 million on that 1-1 or whatever. He can decide where he wants to go every year and he also puts pressure on the team. But from the team's perspective, and to bring James Harden, like the Sixers now get something for James Harden. Like it's annoying he's done this. It's frustrating that he's opted in and been like, be like, trade me here and everything. But at least they get something. If he would have just opted out and walked, and let's say he was willing to take whatever the Clippers could offer him in free agency, who knows what that would have been, whether it's a sign and trade or whatever.
It's basically zero because the sign and trade would have been illegal. So he would have
Okay,
had to
that I
sign
was
like,
wondering.
unless they would have traded a bunch of guys into cap space for nothing back and dumped money and renounced rights for people, he would have been on like
Right.
an absolutely tiny deal.
But let's just say he was willing to do that. He was willing to sign for $1 million and he wouldn't have, but let's just say
Yeah.
like, then the Sixers get nothing back from him. Nothing. At least now the Sixers have a $35 million trade piece where they can move him for pieces to the Clippers, where they can then flip those pieces if they're trying to get Dame or whatever. So yes, it is frustrating that the players opt into these contracts and then try to force their way out, but the teams benefit from it too in the way that they can acquire something. Now, like to the fans' perspective, and this is another question I wanted to ask you. So I saw a really good tweet, and I apologize, I can't remember who it was from, but basically saying like fans live through this with Ben Simmons. They're now going to live through it again with James Harden. And like a large part of the past whatever years, 2 seasons, season 2.5, whatever it is, has been like fans sitting while we read cryptic social media messages. We have this player that doesn't want to play here. And like, I don't know, from a fan perspective, and you can't make the decision based off the fans. What's the saying? Like, if you listen to the fans, you'll end up sitting with them or whatever. But every situation is unique. Like, how much of this do you think is the Sixers just need to get James Harden out of here and just like have some peace with their team and their fan base? And how much is worth like holding on for him?
Well, so we've discussed a ton the apathy that has set in amongst the fans and you got to prove it, you got to do this, you got to do that. I think this is also a gigantic part of it. Just the fact that over the last, let's call it 5 to 7 years, that this fan base has had to deal with so much bullshit between Markelle Fultz forgetting how to shoot, Ben Simmons never learning how to shoot and crumbling mentally in the playoffs, Brian Colangelo and his burner accounts. Well, maybe not his, but someone close to Brian
Yes.
Colangelo's burner accounts, slandering the best player on the team in favor of propping up Ben Simmons, leaking medical information about players on the team. One thing after another, letting Jimmy Butler walk in service of signing Al Horford, all kinds of just like whether it's basketball decision making, off court stuff, how Joel and James are responding to having a fucking meltdown in game 7 of the biggest series they've had in 20 plus years. The fan base has had to put up with so much shit. And I just think about all the time, like, why would these people continue engaging with the team if they have to deal with like this? Isn't even just you have to deal with a frustrating basketball team on the floor. It's like they have to hear over and over and over again about how this guy who went out like a complete loser in the playoffs, it's like, I don't want to be here. I only want to go to this team. And that team's not even offering like fucking Terrence Mann. No disrespect to Terrence Mann. And they're
No
setting
disrespect,
that
but yeah.
like he's a good
No,
role player, but like the fact that that's supposed to be the blinding neon line they won't cross is just absolutely insane. And so for that to be essentially the topic of the entire offseason, because they haven't signed anybody of note. They've signed a couple guys who are minimum contract players who are not going to be difference makers for the team. And so all these people are going to hear heading into preseason is, what's James doing? What is Daryl Morey trying to do? What's this team going to look like? Over and over and over and over again. It's like, dude, how can you put people through this like this over and over again? Like, my emotions have been stripped away for a long time in terms of like following the league and following the Sixers. It's very much like, hey, this is a great story for me that I get to cover, and we'll get lots of clicks and lots of podcast listening and things of that nature. But I just can't imagine being like emotionally invested in this team that over and over again just kicks the fan base while they're down. And it's like, you're going to put up with this because we think that's the best thing to do. Like that's terrible. And that, I think, is one of, again, to your point that you made, it's not a good reason to make a trade, but it has to be something on your mind if you're like in charge of this team, that the fans are already fed up, and you're going to have them go through months of this in the season to say, we might get like one extra pick, or they might include Terrence Mann in this trade. Like, at what cost?
Yeah. Well, so I remember prior to the I guess it was probably 2021 draft, or maybe 2020. It was whatever the Devontae Smith draft was. The Eagles are drafting number 10 overall at the time, because they traded back from 6 and then 12, whatever. And I remember saying, like, people hate this. People have revisionist history. People hated the Eagles after that 2020 season. They were mad at Doug, mad at Carson, like Howie, all those things. And there was talks about like drafting Devontae, or there was a guard out of USC, Elijah Vera Tucker. And the argument was like, they need a guard. He's a great offensive lineman. I remember saying, like, honestly, sometimes, man, you just got to do the exciting thing. And like the fans kind of deserve Devontae over a guard that we then all have to like sit here and talk about. Well, he's going to make the interior. Like, maybe it's the right football move. And obviously Devontae's awesome. So that was the right football move. But if you're Daryl and you're sitting up there every day, and whether you're in Center City walking around like he likes to talk about, or whether you're up in your office at the practice facility, like, doesn't part of you think, man, I know that if I really hold out, and with Ben, it worked. Like, you got James Harden, but it might not work again. And if he can just get rid of Harden today and have fans be like excited, I don't know. I would probably still advise him to hold on for the best trade, because they do have a chance to win a title, and that's probably what matters most. But I do think there is something to, like, God, they need some type of positivity here, something fans are excited about, something for fans to like call in a WIP and say, oh, I'm so happy this happened. Like, when's the last time Sixers fans have been able to do that? So I think that fans are fed up
when they traded for James Harden in the first place.
Yeah, honestly, probably when they traded for James in the first place. So I think fans are like fed up of the cryptic messages. They did it with Joel. Daryl even does it. Daryl's aren't really cryptic, actually. Daryl's are more just like jokes he thinks are funny. And now James does the cryptic stuff. So I think people are fed up with it, and it's an interesting line the Sixers have to walk. So the other kind of news, I guess, that just kind of came out this morning, or was just reported this morning, is that in talks with the Clippers, obviously about James Harden, PJ Tucker's name has come up. Now, it's interesting to consider, because the Sixers, and Daryl Morey especially, has like really stressed the idea of cap space next year and how that could help them, and how they could add max players and they'd still have Joel along with max slots, and that's very rare to have, all those things. PJ is like one of the only, I think it's just Embiid, Maxey, or I guess not Maxey, just Embiid, Tucker, and maybe Melton, if I'm not mistaken, are the ones that are
Melton's
signed.
A free agent next summer, so
So is it Embiid, Tucker, and then do they technically own Maxey's rights beyond that? Like, I know they only have 3 or 4
they'll have
players.
his rights they'll have his like cap hold for next year. I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
I guess it'll probably be like Springer and, whatever. Like
Paul Reed, did we include him?
Oh, right. Paul Reed, assuming they get out.
Well, assuming they make the second round of the playoffs.
Yeah,
but
which, is unfortunately fortunately been a guarantee for this team. But anyway, the question is this a good opportunity for the Sixers to try to get off the PJ Tucker contract? Like, if you're Daryl and you're going to have to trade Harden, you think he's not going to come here, it's going to be a problem. Like, there's certain things you can try to accomplish here, whether it's this team is deprived of draft picks. Are you trying to focus on getting draft picks back? Are you focusing on getting players that can help you now? Are you focusing on getting guys that are on 1-year deals? Another thing you can focus on is getting rid of things you maybe don't want anymore. if you're the Sixers, like, would you think about trying to make sure when you trade James that PJ Tucker is attached to that deal?
I don't think it's like a super high priority, only because I think on an expiring contract, there will
Mm-hmm.
always be someone you could just send him to next offseason. Now, you might have to pay some kind of premium for it, whether that's a second round pick, whether it's somebody like a young guy that you're just not that interested in anymore, but a lottery team or rebuilding team might have more time for, will invest in more. Maybe it's something like that. I do think, though, and this has not really been strongly rumored or reported up to this point, but it would make some sense to include him in this deal. And you try to get younger and more athletic. Like we've
Yeah.
seen, as much as PJ acquitted himself fine in like the game 7 against Boston and had some moments
In
in the
that whole
playoffs
series. Yeah.
where, yeah, it wasn't like he was a big problem. But I do think on a night to night basis throughout the season, you could see, all right, this guy doesn't have it tonight. And they had to essentially sit him the entire fourth quarter. And it was, yes, it was because he couldn't hit shots from night to night, but also like this guy can't move as well as he used to. He doesn't have the
Mm-hmm.
legs every single night. And I do think there maybe is an inclination to say we need to get younger, we need to get more athletic. Now I say that, and their signings have been Patrick Beverly, who's getting older,
Right. And
obviously,
every
and less
center they can
athletic.
find.
Mo Bamba, not the he's huge and he's athletic in the sense that
Long.
he can
Yeah.
block shots, but he does not move well in space. So the team has not really gotten more athletic, certainly. So maybe that's a consideration as they move into the future. In terms of what I think they should do or what they should prioritize in a trade, I know the cap space component is a big thing and part of the future planning. I don't think you can just like go all in on that, right? Like if the difference is they're going to take on Marcus Morris, who, oh, he's expiring, but I don't think is that good at this
Mm-hmm.
point and isn't really going to help them as much as they need the return for Harden to help them. I don't think that's worth it. Like I think you have to get guys who are going to help Joel Embiid right now, even if that means, they make another 10 to $15 million next season. I tend to think those type of deals, the $10 million deals, the $15 million deals, even up to like 20, depending on the player, I think those are always movable if it's a good player. I don't think there's ever going to be a case. Now, maybe this new CBA will prove me wrong on that, but
Mm-hmm.
I just tend to think those guys will always find a home. You might get nothing back for them or very little back for them, but if you're doing it just to clear cap space and you're going to sign max free agent, you don't really care that you're moving like a Korkmaz level player or somebody above that level for peanuts.
So, couple of thoughts off that. One, I do wonder with Joel as your best player if you're ever going to be able to be like a truly athletic, fast team. Like if your best
It's a
player
fair
is
point.
kind of like plotting is maybe not the right word, but he certainly is not like a sprint up and down the court full time. Now, I do wonder with Joel getting married, if there's anything we know about getting married, it's you lose a ton of weight or you at least try to be in your best shape before the wedding. So who knows? Maybe we're about to be skinny Joel thanks to the marriage this year. But
Yeah, I
from an
put back
athletics,
on all my weight I lost for my
dude,
wedding. So
tell me about it, man. Like every year, like I look at pictures from my wedding and I just think, you know what, man? At least thank God I was able to get in shape for that because it's certainly
oh,
since
listen,
then.
man, I looked great in those pictures. That's all that
Yeah, you'll never be
counts.
able to take that from me. The slow decline sense, not as good. But like PJ Tucker, I think is to your point, a fine piece to have next year. I don't think this is like a contract you won't be able to get off of. If anything, he probably maybe has more value next year because he isn't expiring. But like, I don't know. Do you think he fits with Nick Nurse in terms of he's a good defender, he's versatile, like he's switchable, so I guess that helps. But he's not like a young guy in that way. So I do wonder if Nick Nurse would have like wants him. Like if Nick Nurse values having
I
him.
I think any head coach would value what PJ Tucker
Okay.
does. He's always going to be one of those quintessential. Oh, he's more than the box scorer. He's a
Yeah.
culture setter. I think like having his voice is also really important. Just having guys who at practice every day and things like that are not dogging it and showing the proper attention to detail. I tend to think that any coach, let alone Nick Nurse, who we know has been kind of a defensive maniac the last few years, I think he'll have plenty of value for Tucker. But remains to be seen.
So the other thing is, I do wonder, and we did a whole pod on the Joel quote and the tweets and everything, and we touched on this a little bit. But since then, I've been thinking about it more and more. Like, I wonder how Joel feels when he hears Daryl talk about how exciting it is they're going to have a ton of cap space next offseason. Now, Joel ruined kind of any power play he made in the eyes of the public when the next day he comes out and he says, like, oh, I'm just a troll, who cares? But they like before those tweets, the initial read on it could be, hey man, I'm not too excited about this talk of cap space. Like, I want to win right now. I work hard to be able to win right now. I want championship players around me. I mean, how much of that do you think factors into with this where, yeah, Daryl, you can be excited about 2 max spaces, but you have to have Embiid on board with this plan?
Yeah, I mean, that's more important than I would say anything else. You do
Mhm.
have to split the difference because there's no guarantee that you're going to walk into next offseason and Joel is going to care about that cap space, essentially. Like, if there's somebody they can bring in, and, as we know with the NBA, sometimes these deals come together long before they're actually finalized on paper. And the legality of that is a whole nother story. Not saying
Right.
that there's any groundwork being done by the Sixers, obviously, just to be
Well,
clear
James
for
Harden probably feels like this is
the
something
the
that
tampering
yeah.
police out there.
Right.
But yeah, I think a big part of Daryl Morey's job this year is selling Joel Embiid on the future planning here. Now, one thing I will say that has come up when Morey has discussed, the Harden trade and options they had available. I do think there was an idea that their window was shorter than maybe people thought. And so I almost wonder, how long do the Sixers think Joel Embiid is going to be able to help them compete for a title? Like,
Mm.
what do they now? Obviously, even in conversations with me privately, and certainly what they say publicly, they say all the right things. We want Joel to be here forever. We believe he's a title winning player, just won the MVP, blah, blah, blah. Have never said otherwise. I wonder if you put them to a lie detector, like how long they actually think Joel will be at the level that can be a title winning level, or like be at that level where just having him means they might be able to contend. Because with all the injuries, like the cumulative impact of all these injuries, I wonder what their sports science and medical people say about that. And I wonder when they would just say, if there is ever a point, we got to deal this guy before the bottom really falls out. It's certainly something they have to think about. They're never going to publicize it. They'll never talk about it, even to people like me, who
Mhm.
I'd keep my mouth shut if it was like about preserving those relationships. But I'm very curious when the end of the road actually is.
Yeah. And, to make an Eagles reference again, it reminds me of how when the Eagles drafted Jalen Hurts, they said publicly, privately, this has nothing to do with Carson, just high quality backup, blah, blah. But I've always felt deep down, you put like Jeffrey, Howie in a room, like, did they do it with the idea that Carson might be closer to being cooked than we thought? Like, yes, of course. So if you put Daryl, and I guess you would maybe include Nick Nurse in this, into like a room where it's just them, no one can hear them, and they can talk honestly, yeah, it would not surprise me if there were part of them saying, yeah, Joel's, has injury problems. He is getting older, and who knows what that future holds. And it also kind of ties into what I felt all off season, which is they just seem way more excited about Maxi. Like, I know they know Joel's a better player, but I wonder if they think like Maxi can be our guy for the next 5 years that can truly develop. And Joel's more of a, we're going to try to win right now, this year, maybe next year with him. And then after that, who knows? So it is an interesting component of all this. Do you have anything
And
else on the?
I wanted to throw one more thing in there. So there was I think it was a report that came out of this week that essentially said that the Sixers view Joel as wanting to be more of like a Dirk or a
Oh,
Kobe, that they
yes.
play their whole career for one team. And on this subject, I want to note Dirk Nowitzki. So his first season in the NBA was the lockout year. So
Mhm.
he had did not play like 80 games that year because there were only like 50 games in that season. He played 70 plus games for the first 13 years of his career.
Wow.
Kobe Bryant in his career had a couple of 60 plus or like 66, 68 game seasons, but by and large, like never got hurt seriously until late in his career when he had the Achilles thing. And like that is a component of one, the team, a team wanting to invest in a guy until, they're 37, 38, however many years old that guys can play at this point. Is just that person is available constantly and that you can count on them to be, all right, we have to, for cap space reasons, for, players coming and going, for whatever reason, you're going to have to reshuffle the team around a star a lot. But that star is your lighthouse. It's the thing that's just always there. You can look for them when times are tough, when other guys are hurt, when you have to make bets on, different sorts of players for whatever reason. And like Joel hasn't been that guy. Like whenever we talk about team building stuff, some of the consideration is, well, Joel doesn't always stay healthy. So couldn't they really take a risk on building around? Said it about Jimmy Butler, honestly. There are a lot of people who are like, he's been very durable, but he played under Tibbs. He played a ton of minutes. And there was this idea that the bottom is going to drop out on Jimmy. And then you're building around Jimmy and Joel, who already had all the different health issues. Talking about it now with James Harden. Can you give a guy a contract in his mid-30s who doesn't take great care of his body? Or I shouldn't say that. Someone who the off-court lifestyle is going to impact how well they can take care of their body.
Yeah.
And they sign Al Horford because of, at least in part, need some protection behind Joel. Like at a certain point, that's a real team building consideration that like, that's just a thing that there will be a fork in the road where someone has to say, we probably just can't do this anymore. Now, I don't know when that is. Maybe Joel finds a way as he hits his 30s to better take care of his body and, he doesn't get injured as much. But most of these have just been like freak injuries for the most part. It's like him going up for a block, him going up for a dunk, whatever it is. And so, that's why I think about it a lot, because as much as the organization loves him and loves what he's brought to them, there has to be a thought in mind in a lot of people saying, what is the expiration date for this guy?
Well, what's interesting about that is like to come off of the report that he views himself as a Dirk guy that's like that can be what he wants. Like what you just described is what the team wants. Right. And so the Joel quote that we talked about in the last pod about maybe he'll play somewhere else. There was one school of thought, which I don't completely agree with, but like that maybe Joel's saying, hey, I'll get traded. Like it's not up to me. Like I could get.
Well, that's definitely what he loves to imply that all the time.
Right.
He said in press conferences 100 times, well, they could trade me for Steph Curry tomorrow.
Right.
It's like,
but
they're not one,
saying,
the Warriors are not going to do that. But also, they could.
They could, yeah. But what you're saying is kind of like maybe that's in the back of Joel's head. So like the Dirk thing, yeah, he can want to be here the whole time and he can love the idea of being in Philly. And I do think he's embraced the city and all those things. But if the Sixers and Daryl Morey in the back of their head are saying like, hey man, I don't know, like in 2 years, are you going to be able to do that? Like that has nothing to do with Joel's desires. Like if in a year they want to trade Joel, they could do it. So it's interesting to think about it from that perspective of like, the Sixers might just decide to move on from Joel or to say to Joel, hey, we'd love to keep
not
you.
anytime soon, but
not anytime soon, but like, we'd love to keep you, but we're not going to like, you can't be the focal point of the offense anymore if you want to stick around. So lots of course, as always, things going on with the Joel and James thing, and fans, I'm sure will be reading about it on different social media posts. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about before we wrap this up, and obviously I think Sixers fans have a ton of interest in this, but also Eagles fans and Washington Commanders fans. Joshua Harris, and I guess Devils fans too, actually.
Wait, speaking of, did you see they might change the name again? There was a report about that.
I kind of liked when they just did Washington football team. Like it reminds me a little bit.
Because it sounded like a soccer team.
Exactly,
basically.
yeah, like Washington FC or whatever you want to call it. Like I think it sounded cool. But Joshua Harris officially bought the Washington Commanders for now, the name, the Washington Commanders this week. gave his introductory press conference, was peak Josh Harris at the podium, just couldn't be less inspiring. Not a powerful microphone controller for sure. You've been around Joshua Harris, basically since he's bought the team, or at least the large majority of it. I've always felt he gets a bad rap in Philadelphia. I think he is a very good owner. He has turned this team around. When he was not the owner, they were kind of like the less important team to Ed Snyder. They weren't anywhere. They weren't winning. Like, yes, they've not been out of the second round, but with Joshua Harris, they've won way more than they've lost. They've become a perennial 50-win team. And I also think with Joshua Harris, like, he's paid for a good head coach. He's paid for a good general manager. They don't go over the luxury tax, or at least that they're not at like that second apron, but they do spend a ton of money. He's built a new facility. I think Joshua Harris has been a great owner. I'm curious from your perspective, what you think of Joshua Harris as an owner. And I guess, like, what should Washington fans maybe expect from him?
Yeah. So I think overall good for many of the reasons that you just laid out. Like, we can sit here and say Doc Rivers was a bad hire, for example. There are a lot of people who didn't like it. I didn't love it at the time. Certainly came around a little bit, but there are a lot of people who were pointed out as past failures. But he was the big name on the market. They paid a lot of money to bring him in. Daryl Morey, similar situation. Like, I know not everybody is happy with him and what he's done leading the team up to this point, but biggest front office guy on the market. They went out, they paid big money for him to come in here and try to lead this team. And I think if you just look at, bringing in Hinkie and green lighting, sort of the thing that kickstarted this whole era, that rebuild, I think the place you'd criticize him for is maybe not sticking to convictions enough, and getting bullied off of that in some ways by the league. And then Colangelo comes in, and then there's some weird reporting over the years about he's listening too much to Scott O'Neill, or Alex Rucker ends up having lots of influence in the front office, and these people behind the scenes pulling strings and pushing them in different directions for maybe not always the right reasons. I think that's what if you're a fan of a team that's owned by Harris, I think that would be the concern. I think the luxury tax stuff has probably been slightly overblown over the years, because they do spend. Like, if you look at, I think probably a better example of the investment of the team than even the head coach is, like, look at the assistant coach staff that Doc Rivers had. There's a lot of guys, like former head coaches, like big name guys. They're not coming to take jobs like this unless they are going to get paid a decent amount of money. Like, having Dave Yeager, bringing in Dan Burke from the Pacers, who he had been with the Pacers for, a long, long time, like a couple decades, essentially. And so to get a guy who had lasted across multiple coaching staffs to leave his home, where he had set up like a home base for a long time, and come to Philadelphia, yes, it's about the opportunity, but there were plenty of other opportunities for him before that. So in some respects, it's a reflection of what is the team willing to offer to a coach, to an assistant coach, to come here. They build the practice facility. I know there's obviously like the tax incentives and all that. Like, that's a whole nother thorny subject that we don't have to get into here. The arena thing, I think there's some mistrust, but like, up to this point, all we've seen is they're going to privately fund this, and they're not asking for taxpayers in Philadelphia to pay for this new arena. They're repurposing a place that essentially nobody uses. Like, nobody goes to that new fashion district, essentially, that I know. And they're going to use that so like, they're doing something that people don't like, which is building a new stadium, but they're doing it in the best way, as far as we can tell, that they can possibly do it. So I think, like, big picture, pretty good. I know there have been some issues over the years, but I certainly don't, they're not like, he's not an absentee owner, which is important. Not somebody who's saying, I won't pay for this. And he's not like a Robert Sarver, former Phoenix Suns owner, where you hear all kinds of horror stories, or they make shitty trades specifically not to pay people. I don't think you see evidence of that. So is he like a top 5 owner? No. Is he probably in the top half of owners? I think I would say so. Yeah.
Well, I think if he just had a different personality, we would talk about him
It
probably
would
more.
definitely help. Yeah.
Yeah, like honestly, I love ranking things. I can't imagine how I would go about ranking the owners in the NBA. But like if he was Michael Rubin's personality, like if he was the majority, if Michael Rubin did everything Joshua Harris did, but was the majority owner, like he would be loved by Sixers fans. Because obviously Michael Rubin was a minority owner of the team, like super passionate about the Sixers, always out doing things, very vocal. Like if you look at the owners in the city, Jeffrey Lurie is probably the best owner just because he has the best combination of like his team wins all the time, clearly seems like he cares, he's very much around, and he spends a ton of money. Middleton with the Phillies obviously very much cares, like is willing to spend big money, but like they're not run, and not to get into that whole debate, like run as well as the Sixers. Joshua Harris, to me, like everything you just mentioned, I think Washington fans should expect to get an owner that is going to spend like almost, I want to say like whatever it takes, but they'll probably get a new practice facility. They'll probably get a new stadium. They'll probably pay for a high level head coach or whatever you think of Ron Rivera, and they'll pay for a great general manager. And while I would love to have an owner of the team that is like super passionate and I feel cares as much as me and like is, living and dying with every possession in a playoff game, like, yes, I agree. Ideally, that's what you want. But if I had to pick between the two, I would rather have an owner that's just willing to write a bunch of checks and gets a bunch of things done. So I don't think there's like Sixers fans like hate Joshua Harris, which I'm surprised by, or at least the fans I interact with. I think he's been very good. Like I think like, and especially if he's an actual fan of Washington. Now with the whole Eagles thing, it'll be interesting to see how that goes over. Like I could see from a fan's perspective not loving the fact that he owns a team that's a divisional rival of the Philadelphia like football team when you own the basketball team. I can see that. But I think Joshua Harris has definitely been undervalued. I mean, I'm guessing you don't spend a ton of time around him at the
Nah.
facility, like
Very little
yeah,
time with him beyond what we see or what
at
you
press
guys would see at
conferences.
like press conferences. He's just because even when they do those, he like comes in his helicopter and
Right.
then leaves. So it's not like he's just hanging out with the media for a long time and doing off the record type stuff. I
Mhm.
think, well, we should be clear that like I think some of the reason that people don't like him is like they have had some self-inflicted wounds over the years. Like the biggest example I can think of, and this obviously had no impact on like the on-court basketball stuff. When the pandemic hit and they tried to be one of the
Yes.
first teams to like reduce salaries and all that and went back on it after Joel essentially humiliated them by saying, "Well, I'm going to pay their
Yeah.
salaries."
That's right.
And
I
they
forgot about that.
so you could sit here and say the important thing is that they course corrected, right? Like they could have very easily just like eaten the PR hit and still furloughed these people, whatever. Like I do think there's two sides of that coin where that was very obviously a bad and awful thing to do to people. But if you do something bad and you're at least willing to look in the mirror and say, yeah, we fucked up and shouldn't have done that. Like that's an important quality to have. I know from a public facing perspective, there are a lot of people who are just never going to forgive you for certain things.
Mhm.
But that's as I have gotten older and less stubborn, I would say people's willingness to admit to and own up to mistakes is like a lot more important than I would have said when I was like I don't know, a college student that said, "Who fucking cares? Get it right the first time." It's like
Yeah.
that kind of attitude.
When it
And
was easy to
I'm
think
not
that
saying that to
getting it
excuse
right
this.
is
Like it was
easy.
a horrible, horrible thing that they did. But I'm
Mhm.
just like, if you look at it from that perspective, and then apply that to like how they're running the team, if you're willing to say, "Yeah, we made this decision wrong. This was the wrong trade. We did this wrong," and then plan accordingly in the future, have a different process behind that trade. Like that's a thing that applies to so many levels of the organization. And so I think maybe they've been too reactive, and that would be the big criticism where the stuff with the league office and Adam Silver and they got bullied out of that plan to a certain extent. That's a problem. And you have to have conviction strong enough that outside public pressure doesn't make you do stupid shit. But I think they're receptive to what they hear. I think they're willing to spend. And I think, frankly, they're not at the like Jerry Jones level of like being too involved. Where Josh Harris, I think, is pretty involved with the team. There are a lot of like meetings that none of us are privy to that he's involved with the front office and so forth. But yeah, overall, I think good. And I think it's certainly worse for the Eagles that he owns the team versus Daniel Snyder, who created this like awful, toxic culture that has essentially like people that are Eagles fans don't want to hear this. That was a great organization for like a long, long time. Very successful team. At least had like a successful era from the beginning of the 80s until like the early 90s for sure.
Yeah.
But now you have to contend with potentially at least like a competent organization. They might not win anything of consequence, but they're at least like they'll get players and coaches and front office people that they probably wouldn't have gotten with Snyder running the team.
Yeah, I mean, the good news for Eagles fans is like the team is very far ahead right now. Like they're just further along in there and they're well run. So it's going to be tough to catch up. But yes, to your point, like it is not good that a very good, whatever, like competent owner now owns Washington. Whereas before the guy that owned it was obviously a train wreck, in basically every sense of the word, it seems like both on and off as an owner. So Joshua Harris, my advice would be don't hire people away from the Eagles if you don't want a bad PR hit. Like imagine all of a sudden he's signing their free agents. He's like,
imagine if Howie Roseman went to Washington.
Oh my God. Or if, you paid Howie just like a ton of money to leave. I think Howie like will never, ever leave the Eagles. I actually think it's gotten to the point. I mean, this is the nicest way possible. Like he almost looks like an Eagle. Like I swear, if you look at him, like from like when he got hired to now, his face is definitely more like,
that's one of the more insane takes I think you've ever had.
He's like so about being the Eagles that he almost looks like one now. He's gotten in better shape. Like I give Howie credit.
I don't, to your point, I don't think he would leave. One, because I think Lurie loves him and would pay him the type of money to just like not do that. But also Howie loves the team and like
Howie will never leave. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yes. Howie will never leave. But Josh Harris, don't try to hire him away if you don't want people to hate you even more. So we will wrap it up on that note. We'll record next week.
Yeah, nice pro ownership note. I'm sure that people will be loving
Kyle,
that.
Anti-player, pro owner. I think that's the clear takeaway from today's pod. So who knows what will be posted by players between now and next week? We could get a Tyrese Maxey post.
We could get more uncomfortable, Elliot. You never
exactly.
know.
Well, the one thing about this offseason is we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? That's what Harden's teaching us. So thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you to everybody that's been in the chat, Miles, all types of people in there talking, William. Really appreciate you guys watching. And it's fun to see you guys, talking to each other in the chat while we talk about the Sixers too. So thanks for listening. Make sure you download the Odyssey app. Like I said, make sure you leave those 5-star reviews, even just simply because it makes me happy to read. And Kyle, I will talk to you next time, man.
Talk to you guys soon.